Wisconsin Alzheimer's Institute in Madison. And no financial disclosures to indicate. And what we're going to be talking about the next hour is providing information about the prevalence of Down syndrome and dementia, as well as some communication and dementia care strategies for that. I can be very informal with presentations, so if you have questions along the way, I'd be happy to go with that. Ultimately, you sitting in the chairs, I respect and value your time, so I want you to leave feeling like your time was worth it in this next hour. So please stop me if you have questions. Is there anybody in the audience has a very specific thing they want to make sure we cover before the end of the hour? No expectations, huh? Or specifics? Okay.
We might have along the way.
Okay, all right. We can deal with that. That's good. So, as I mentioned, I work with the Wisconsin Alzheimer's Institute in Madison. It is a part of the School of Medicine and Public Health. And so it was started in the late 1990s by Dr. Sager, who was a geriatrician. And his goal, after having a family member living with Alzheimer's disease, was to try to improve access to the diagnostic services, as well as the treatment, access to treatment, and then to support caregivers who are in the support systems of folks living with a dementia condition. And so, I'm not sure what that means. So I work in a division in one of the pillars, the last one, which is the Dementia Diagnostic Network. I worked for like 20 years at Waukesha Memorial Hospital in Waukesha County at various units, but the last year of that tenure that I was there, I worked actually in the diagnostic clinic, went back for a master's degree and then oversaw that clinic. So I actually have direct experience with the diagnosing, following up with folks in the community, as well as overseeing such a clinic. And so my job now is to work with the clinics throughout the state that have this specialty type of clinic set up to help do what we call the differential with individuals maybe experiencing some behavioral or mental health issues, as well as cognitive changes, and determining whether or not we think that there is a dementia condition in place. And so I travel throughout the state working with, we have 36 clinics at this time in our network. And then I also try to bring on new clinics again to improve access to diagnosing dementia. So right now, the red colored counties are counties that we have those 36 clinics in. The ones with the yellow stars, so there's 6 of them in the network that indicate they have experience working with people that are living with an intellectual disability and diagnosing dementia. All the clinics have had folks that come through their clinic and they're able to manage them. They're just not as efficient and as effective. Where these 6 clinics say, we are very good at doing this, and we have experience, we have the capacity to do this, go ahead and come to our clinics. So good news, bad news in terms of this slide. Like the general population, we're living longer. So currently, if you're in the general population, your average lifespan, if you were born today, will be 78.9 years. If you're female, we get a little edge up on that number. We're going to be into our 80s. Males a little bit younger. The same has happened for folks living with Down syndrome. So if they were born in the 1900s, the chances are of them living to the age of 9 was about where it was at. Today, they're living till they're 66 is the average lifespan. That's awesome news. The bad news is they're now more susceptible to the aging diseases and things that occur as we get older, just like the rest of us. Okay, so I think I need a drink of water here for some reason. So when you look at this graph, this side over here is your brain's ability, your brain's power. This line here says at midlife, so at midlife, your brain power might be up here, right? That's where we want it to be. As time goes on and we get closer to death, there is something called age-associated changes as we age, that our brain changes subtly. That's the green line. These are normal aging changes that goes on with the brain that will not impact our ability to live our life. If you live to your 100 and you have this is an awesome thing. However, As we age, there are some different diseases and conditions that start to pop up for us that can potentially cause what we call mild cognitive impairment, and eventually might go into something called dementia. And so that happens later on as we age. So with folks that are living with Down syndrome, what we find for them is that we start to see these conditions actually here, a decade or two before the general population. So does everybody know what dementia means? So it can be memory loss. So dementia is a term, it's a clinical term that says the brain's ability has declined from a previous state. Like that graph I said, it's declined from a previous state. It's now interfering with your ability to do everyday tasks. So it's impacting your ability to do your checkbook, or driving, or make meals. It's impacting your ability to navigate your life. And it's not due to like a medical reason, like you're in a coma, or you just had a stroke, and you're rehabilitating from that. So that's what that is what dementia is. You've had a decline, it's impacting your ability to navigate your life, and it's not due to a medical condition that we can change. So dementia is not a normal sign of aging, as that one line showed. A lot of people will go to their death with never having experienced dementia. It's just age-associated changes they have had. So someone mentioned memory. So when most people think of dementia, they automatically think of memory. Actually, the brain has all kinds, 6 domains, main domains. Dementia can impact any one of them, not just memory. Most people think dementia means memory. I've worked with a lot of people over my career who really don't have a memory deficit. Their deficit may be in visual spatial, executive functions. So there are a lot of diseases that can impact the other domains. And so memory is not the only connection to dementia. So remember I said it impacts, these declines in your brain's ability, impacts your ability to navigate your life. These are in the areas of what we call function. And so early when we were first born, we learned to do those basic things, what we call ADLs, dress ourselves, eat, transfer, toilet. Think about this in context with someone who has Down syndrome and their ability to do all those pieces. If you have a couple people in your mind that you work with that has Down syndrome, think about their ability to do those things currently. Then we have what we call ADILs, which are things that we learned a little bit later, how to do a checkbook, how to cook, how to shop, how to drive a car. Those are done a little bit later in life. Again, think about someone living with Down syndrome, how their abilities are to do this. So what is dementia? I mentioned it's just not memory. There's actually a whole, what I call a bucket of different conditions and diseases. Most of them are experienced later in life that cause dementia. So one that comes to mind when people hear dementia, they think Alzheimer's. That's one disease that can be called a dementia. Then we have vascular dementia, often associated with strokes. We have Lewy body, I call a cousin to Alzheimer's disease. Frontal temporal conditions, which happen in front part of the brain. Traumatic brain injury can cause dementia. Parkinson's disease, some people with Parkinson's will eventually develop a dementia condition with it. There are the different chemical and body thyroid issues that you can potentially have that can cause declines in your brain's ability. Pseudodementia, which is a fancy word for a clinical depression that's impacting a person's ability to function. Nutritional disorders, and there are many more. So the word dementia is like a big bucket. There's all these diseases and conditions that are in that causes your brain to decline its abilities, that impacts your ability to navigate and do your life. So what is the number one condition or disease that causes dementia? Come on. Oh, this is a quiet group. We gotta wake you up. Alzheimer's is number one. What's number two? Vascular. Number three, cousin to Alzheimer's, Louis. And then the frontal temporal. If you get one disease that causes dementia, are you exempt from getting any more?
No.
No, actually they're finding the mixed bag dementia is actually the most prevalent piece. And that if someone has one, they often will have the tip off. And I would see this when I saw folks that were living with Alzheimer's disease not manage their meds and do other things, and then they have strokes. Do you know what I mean? And then they have an onset of a vascular dementia. So with the intellectual disability population, what we find is actually doing the diagnostic workup is a little bit more challenging in that the tests that they use to measure the brain decline are done in the general population. So you can't easily just take out a mini mental or a cognizant and then apply it to someone who doesn't have the skill set to hit the 30 to begin with, right? Or the top score. So there are some challenges in diagnosing the disorder. And so there are other challenges too in terms of sometimes someone might not even be verbal. So that's why I said we have 6 clinics that feel that they're proficient or have enough experience to do them very well. So there is something as someone who works with folks living with an IDD is to actually start doing some baselining or getting information about the individual. This is a screening tool, and I have a couple copies to show you that was developed by a national group. And the goal is to actually set up a baseline for that person. And it's a screening tool. It's not a diagnostic tool or any type of an assessment. It's just it's getting some information about the person. They recommend doing the tool at the age of 40 and then every year after. There are some other proponents saying at the age of 35 to do it. And so what you're trying to do with this tool is get a baseline for the person so that as time goes on, if there's declines, you can look back or triggers that you should be looking at doing a workup. I have advocated that folks actually do it as a exit the high school years or the formal schooling, in that we know that if someone has a highly structured environment like a school setting, they leave it and they go into an environment that isn't as structured, doesn't have the support, a lot of times you'll see the declines. So you're better off doing it where you know the person's at the highest proficiency they are so that you have something to compare to in the future. The other piece is some of this population is very prone to seizures. So if you have a seizure and a head injury, you've missed that boat of getting the top of the baseline. So I advocated at the time people transition out of school that they should actually do it then, and then wait a couple years to redo it. Here's a tool here. Like I said, I have a couple copies. It comes, the website comes with like a manual on how to do it. This comes in multiple languages. It's nice. It's like I said, a nice screening tool. The trick is someone who fills it out has to know the person very well. So why is it that we're looking at Down syndrome and Alzheimer's being so much together? It's because on chromosome 21, there's a gene called APP that sits on it. Folks living with Down syndrome will have a partial or an extra copy of that chromosome 21. That seems to make them more susceptible to this gene, or because this gene's there. As a result, this gene is the one that allows this beta amyloid, these plaques, to develop in the brain. And so what we see is that by the age of 40, a lot of folks living with Down syndrome will have a lot of this, what we call pathology in their brain. Now this is kind of controversial in that we know that people have gone through their entire life, have had only those age associate, they don't have dementia, and they die, and on autopsy we see this pathology. So we're not quite sure why some people will have the pathology, not demonstrate a dementia condition, while some people do and they have a dementia condition. But this is where we feel, or where science is right now telling us why the Down syndrome individual is living with it is more likely to have Alzheimer's disease.
Could you go back one? I just want to see what you did for testing. I know you said it's online, but the one before this?
Sure, it's not a test. It's just a screen.
Oh, what you noticed. Okay.
Right, well, for some of the signals for folks.
Yes. Yeah. I just want to, could you just say them quickly?
Sure, and actually,
Oh, you have it already?
I will give you one of the manuals, which they're listed in the
thank
other
you.
ones, so there you go.
Appreciate it.
You bet. So this is visual. of that. So this is your brain. You have all these wonderful neurons that when you say 2 + 2 makes you know it's 4, you want to walk, it helps you. These are the plaques that start to develop. They kind of suffocate the neurons, and then these tangles, this feather-like thing get all kind of messed up, so they don't function like a healthy cell. So in the general population, this is the prevalence we see for dementia conditions, that big bucket, versus ones with just Alzheimer's disease. And so by the time you're 85, the prevalence is, here's the prevalence for them. This specific article I looked at was saying that the actual cause of dementia or the prevalence of dementia was going down. When I was in clinic, we always said that by the time you hit 85, 40% of folks have some sign of Alzheimer's disease, but it may not be enough to diagnose, and so we have a category called now mild cognitive impairment. So some people will fall into that, and that's something that's evolved over the last couple decades. When we look at folks living with an intellectual developmental disability but not Down syndrome, here's your prevalence. When we look at folks living with a Down syndrome, we see the numbers go really far up, right? Here's the general population. Now look at the category of 50 to 59. You're looking, depending on whose study you're looking at, 20 to 50% of folks will be living with it. In the general population, only 0.4%. That's a big difference, right? So I did this slide specifically because what we have found in the diagnostic world is as soon as someone sees anything going wrong with someone living with Downs, they think they have dementia. They automatically think it's got to be Alzheimer's, something's going on. And I want to kind of let you realize that someone in their 50s, 70% will not have Alzheimer's disease. It's only 30%. You see the difference? So if you have someone in their 50s and something's going wrong or something's different, don't automatically chalk it up to Alzheimer's disease. I've talked with a practitioner recently who said that it was a psychologist had someone referred in, and they were referred in because the person was refusing to walk, they weren't participating, they were just kind of not wanting to do anything. And they referred him in for a dementia worked up, but before you start doing the testing, we always rule out those medical causes. Turns out the person had a fractured hip. And they thought they might have Alzheimer's disease. So it's really critical that you rule out any medical. It could be infections, it can be all different stuff. But the point is, in the 50s, it's only 30%. I mean, that's a big number, don't get me wrong. But 70% do not. It's not an automatic when you're in your 50s. And when we hit our 60s, again, it's 50-50, almost like a flip of a coin, right? So if you have someone who you're seeing changes with and they're living with Down syndrome, really have the medical workup, because it may be something medically going on. It may not be the start of Alzheimer's disease. And I want to point this out because people just jump to it automatically because they heard all about that chromosome 21 and all those pieces. So with Alzheimer's disease, the mild stages, what we usually see is short-term memory, forgetfulness, diminished inability to kind of attend to information, some judgment issues, visual spatial changes. Remember all those cognitive domains I showed you? There were 6 big ones. It's not just memory, it's some of the other pieces. I'm putting this up there because as you interface with someone living with Down syndrome and dementia, think about the decline going on with them and how they're going to impact your ability to communicate. Then we have the moderate stage. We have a progression of some of the diseases. We have additional cognitive deficits becoming more evident. Here we have a problem with time. This is in the general public. Now we have a problem understanding where a place is. And then the last stage is where you have pretty much 24-hour assistance needed. But these are the cognitive changes, kind of an overview of cognitive changes. Think about how that impacts your ability to talk or interface with somebody. And it's a moving target, right? So over the years of working with folks living with dementia, I kind of came up with my own little theory. So my job in clinic was to do all that history taking from families and stuff, And so they would come in and they would tell me all the different things, and I'd ask how they're driving, how they're bathing, what are their academic history. I'd ask all these questions on the individual. I got to the point where I started to realize, or this was how I did it, that there was this kind of the Russian dolls. Do you know what I'm talking about, Joe? Know the stack dolls? That a person, when they're young, they develop memories that as I kind of viewed as that little doll in the middle. This is when they were born, their early childhood, elementary school, middle school, high school. And then the next doll that goes on top of it is like the young adulthood. And the next doll is middle adult, older adult. And then the top doll would be the last few. So if I had a family member coming in and the person was talking a lot about when they got married, what their jobs were like, I kind of knew that they were into the disease pretty far with Alzheimer's. If or if they came in and they don't remember the granddaughter that was born last year, but the one 5 years ago they remembered, it seemed like there's this, as the person progresses through the stage, the more recent memories start to disappear, and you start to have the dolls that are younger. Does this make sense? So when you would go and someone says, I want to go home, they're moderate stage. They're not talking about this house that they lived in. They're talking about one of these houses, right? And I just found that really helpful me to kind of work with that individual, realizing when I would be talking to them or asking them questions or trying to use distractions, I would think about which doll I was on and what would be most prevalent to engage them. Does that make sense? So I have this kind of, as I go through, to kind of remind you of that when you do the communication tips we're going to talk about. So if someone, like repetitiveness, right? That's because I don't remember they did a couple minutes ago. That first doll's gone. So you can't rely on that doll, right? So when you interface with someone who's living with dementia, the reality is they're not coming to that interface with the same skill set you are. We know they've had declines. So the responsibility of that success of that interface is really on you, right? Because they don't have the abilities, the same abilities. So you hold and you bear responsibility of making sure there's success. If you start to think that way when you interface them, you're going to be much more content with your results. So when you're interfacing with someone living with dementia, bottom line is you can't take their actions personally. And I worked with a lot of families that said, oh, they're doing this intentionally, they're trying to do this. No, if they don't have that short-term memory in place, they're not remembering what they said to you. They're not trying to just get you going or get you wild up. Remain calm, positive, be patient. And the other thing is, after working in Milwaukee County for a number of years, really appreciating cultural differences. You really have to start to appreciate that, especially with Alzheimer's disease. And you will see that also like with someone who has English as a second language, that as those dolls disappear, their primary or first language will be the language they go to, because the outer dolls of the English have disappeared, right? So the other part is paying attention to emotions. So this young woman that was referred into as a psychologist for diagnosis of potential dementia had the hip fracture. She had all the signs that she had pain. They were misinterpreting her behavior as a cognitive decline, not for what it was that she was in pain. So you really have to be attentive for pain, especially as someone progresses through the disease. Your ability to communicate that will kind of disappear. So pay attention to feelings. The other thing is when you're doing the interface, and if you've seen someone getting riled up, you need to think, okay, I'm responsible. I have to do something different so I don't continue to escalate them. So arguments are really important to try to avoid. What am I talking about? Well, when I worked at the senior health center, I did some follow-up with folks after clinic. And we had been referred in. I think most of the people in this group will probably appreciate this fairly good. We had a gentleman that brought his wife in. And they were referred in. She ended up having Alzheimer's disease. And they were referred in because they had these huge arguments. And so, and he was an Archie Bunker. Do you all know who I'm talking about, right? Does anybody not know Archie Bunker? Oh, you probably don't, do you? Anybody want to describe Archie Bunker? Come on, and you can just say that how it is.
Crotchety old man.
Yeah.
Very prejudiced.
Yes,
Extremely-
racist, misogynist.
Yes, very traditional, what women do, what men do. Oh my goodness, right? So they had
No
come in.
filter.
No filter. He said how it was, and you deserve to hear it, and you should thank him.
Yes.
So they were referred in because they would have this ongoing conversation that would escalate into arguments. And the conversation always seemed to center around food. And so what would happen is, he would say, oh, well, what are we going to have for dinner, expecting her to make dinner. And she says, well, I really don't know. Maybe we should ask mom and dad. Well, at one time in their marriage, her parents lived next door to them, and they often did dinner together. Her parents were deceased now, but she didn't remember. She was further along in those dials, right? She did not recall that her parents were deceased. And she said, well, let's ask mom and dad. And what do you think he would say?
There it is.
Why would we ask them? They're dead. They're in the grave. And she would go, what? What do you mean they're in the grave? No, they're not. They're right next door. How could you be so cruel? And they would escalate and escalate and escalate. Now, she was a nursery school, a daycare center teacher. So whenever she felt threatened or worried about something, what did she teach her students to do? Call 911. So she would call 911 on him, and she would get so angry with him, and he would be asking, and they'd be yelling. So she would call 911. So guess what? His old precinct, because he had been a cop, would show up to their door. And they kept, and he would talk them down, send them back home. This went on and on. He had this fight with her on a regular basis. Finally, the precinct said, you got to do something about it. And so they made him bring her in for an evaluation. So I was sent out to help stop the police, stop the 911 calls. That's what I was sent out to do. He had a hard time learning that he couldn't prove her wrong. You know what he started doing when I said, it's not helpful to tell her that you're not alive. She's not going to believe you. So you know what he did? Got her in the car, took her to the cemetery, showed her the graves. She would sit there and she would sob and just sob.
Because it was new.
Because he thought that they died young.
So they got in the car, they started driving. She'd go, well, what are we going to have for dinner? And she goes, well, let's ask mom and dad. He'd turn the car around and take her back to the grave. So that wasn't a very pleasant conversation I had with him about how cruel he was and re-exposing her to that. She didn't catch on, and he had a hard time learning that. So I had to teach him other ways to handle that. So ultimately we did stop the 911 calls. He did become a converter, yay. But I mean, that's a perfect example, no matter what, there's no proving it. And so families, you can't, why argue? If they really believe something, no matter how you try to prove, the same thing's gonna happen with someone living with Down syndrome. They're not gonna be able to recall that that doesn't happen. So the arguments are futile. Orientating to time, telling them what it is not gonna help you. So the other thing I find what's really important about when you work with someone with dementia is you really have to know them. Just because they're experiencing the declines doesn't mean that they're not someone, and that the parts of them that are still there that you don't recognize. And I found this is a really cool thing. My eyes do see, my ears do hear, I am still me, so let's be clear. My memory may fade, my walk may slow, I am me inside, don't let me go. And I think that's really important to keep something like this in mind when you're working with somebody who is living with something that's progressive and they're going to have losses, that you remember who they are. Even when they got you mad and dandered up, like Archie would be, he had to remember his wife was who she was, right? Mm-hmm. So even with Down syndrome, this telling them, orientating is just going to get you in fights. Not worth it, right? When you work with someone living with Down syndrome, often there's an incentive, a pre-mac. If you do this, you'll get that. That is no longer effective because why? Those dolls are gone. So telling them that there's an incentive, they won't remember. So it's not going to be the motivator. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. This is a very traditional way of helping someone with Down. It's not going to be effective anymore. We are also not going to be trying to improve independence or gain skills because they won't have the short-term memory to help them learn. Learning times become very hard because if you tell them something now, 30 seconds they may not remember it. So how do you remember it? to build on skill. So what we find is, obviously, many of us sitting in the room, we know how important light is now for us to see. As our eyes hit 40, ability to absorb light starts to decline. So it's really important to make sure you have lighting. The other thing is we know folks living with Down syndrome tend to have some other additional eye diseases that they're more prone to, cataracts and such. So we have to pay attention for that for them. And then also hearing is also, there's some special unique things that Down syndrome individuals living with Down syndrome will have. Their ear canals tend to be smaller, so they have more wax buildup. So you have to pay attention to the additional medical conditions that they end up having to bear in addition to others. Traditional, face-to-face, make sure you have good eye contact. Again, culturally, you have to make sure appropriate. When I lived in Milwaukee, worked in Milwaukee County, we had some Asian populations that direct eye contact was inappropriate. So you got to make sure you pay attention to those pieces. So this is I thought, what kind of, these look like little bees at first, but this is a person's head and these are their shoulders. So we all have these social spaces. If you ever go into like a big room, you'll see one person will come sit here, one will come sit here, one will here, one will here. Now, our folks living with Downs, what happens? Sometimes they just come sit right next to you, even though there's a whole big room, right? So my experience in working with, when I worked in my younger years, I oversaw a dual diagnosed home is what they called. They already had an intellectual developmental disability, but also had a behavioral part. I moved into that home when I was working one-on-one with a guy, a young man living with autism. That was the diagnosis at the time. I was trying to help him like on the bus stop and help train him how to navigate to get to work and stuff. And for him, there was nothing called the intimate space. I mean, he would be like on me all the time. That he didn't have a real good idea of what these rules are of space. And so you have to pay attention that with someone living with Downs, because they may not have the same understanding of what this is. And when I worked on the psychiatric units, we had at one time a nurse who had been on vacation. And we had a gentleman on the unit that was moderate to late stage of Alzheimer's disease and was really quite a handful from a behavioral perspective. And I was sitting in report that morning and they were trying to figure out who was going to help him, who was going to give him a bath that day. And like no one wanted to volunteer for it. And this nurse who had been on vacation was sitting in there at the time and she's like, well, what's up? Why would you guys want to bathe him? He's such a nice guy. And well, he groped them. Every time they went to go bathe him, he would touch them all over because after all, they were in his intimate space and he's thinking, oh, here's this young pretty thing, she's touching me like that, well, I'm gonna, reciprocate. She goes, well, why do you guys have that problem? We're like, well, what do you do? Well, what she does is she said, I need your help. She gives a washcloth for one hand and she gives him a bar of soap in the next and she says, can you hang on to this, we're gonna need this. So he's so focused, because he's so far along in dementia, he's really got focus on these things in his hand because he's doing it her a favor. She didn't have any of those problems. But again, when you have to pay attention to your space and what are you communicating to the person what you're doing. She took care of that by kind of giving him an assignment that he thought he was helping her. So you have to pay attention to that. And we're all like, oh my gosh, where you been on a vacation for a week? So very simple things. I used to go do home visits all the time. I would see someone in the clinic have Alzheimer's disease. I had never had a problem getting into their home. They'd knock on the door. I'd say, hi, Sam, this is Jody. Oh, I remember you from being over and seeing Dr. Raster. We had a great time. He didn't have a great time. Your daughter said I could come visit with you. You told me you were going to show me your wedding pictures. I would do different things, drop the daughter's name, where I saw him, that the physician asked me to come. All that stuff helped me get what I needed. And you need to start doing that. You don't come up and say, oh, do you remember me? That would not work, right? You have to help the person. Don't make them search for the answer. If they don't recognize who you are, say who you are in a very nice way. It's really hard to hear the word, do you remember me, if they don't, you know what I mean? I'm not sure how that helps self-esteem at all, does it? So this is one of my favorite commercials of all time. I'm a football fan, I love football. I'm not sure if this was a Super Bowl commercial or not, but it's one of my favorites. So, dude, Okay, hang on to that, right? This is going really well. Is it going well? You all look puzzled.
No.
Is it going well?
No.
It's not, right? My body language, you told it wasn't, right? But my words said it was. Why do you believe my body versus not my words? Because what that is that when we look at direct face-to-face, this is where I struggle with email, when you don't have the visuals and all the tone. You read the email and think, oh, is that a tone, or what are they trying to say to me? What happens is when you actually do live interaction with someone, you actually get 3 parts to pay attention to help you figure out what's going on. One are the words. One is my vocal characteristics. Dude. You know what I mean? Like the difference, how I say it, how fast I say it. And then the body language and facial expressions. So with the words, they only count 7% of the message. Hence, they got trumped by my body language and my voice, right?
Yeah.
When you look at the actual intonation or the vocal characteristics, you look at 38%. So that counts more, right? But then when you look at body language, it carries 53%, or 55, my math is bad, 55. So when you add it up together, the 55 and the 38 is 93% of what you're trying to convey. Only 7%, and this is a face-to-face, will be the words in terms of how much influence it's going to have on the receiver. When you look at Alzheimer's disease, when someone gets to early stage, their ability to understand some words, 1/4 of it's gone. When they get late stage, half of their words, the ability to understand words, are gone. So as a result, you take only that 7% and then you start losing some of the words. What is your best strategy in terms of trying to make sure that communication goes well? Pay attention to your body language and how you're delivering your message. That will make a big difference. So if you have someone that you're reading from their body language that they're getting anxious and upset, what do you need to do with your body language? You need to check it, see what you're delivering, what message. I've gotten a lot of people to do things they really didn't want to do just because I was a cheerleader and I was very pleasant and happy about it, and they, oh yeah, I'll do that. So the other thing is we see the ability to understand words and stuff. Gestures, demonstration, mirroring techniques are very, very important. So like, we'll see this, like my mother-in-law lived with Alzheimer's disease and she wasn't eating so well. But like when we brought her over for dinner, I always put my grandkids by her. They always took forever to eat. So she ate better because she had this group of people that took so long and she would see that they're eating, so she would continue to eat, so she would eat better. But if you put her next to my husband, he's done, right? She hasn't had the chance to start. So the other thing is, try to avoid using the word don't. This is why, if you tell someone, don't cross the street, what are you asking them to do?
Stand still?
Are you?
No. They catch the cross the street.
What happens is you haven't told them what to do, but they may not remember all the whole word you said, the whole sentence. They'll hear across the street. And I learned this when I said I worked at this home that I had people who do it. A lot of times they didn't hear the first part, they would only do the last half. It's like, I said, don't. Well, it's because they only heard the last part. The other thing is, you haven't told them what to do. So they sit there kind of perplexed, figuring out, well, what am I supposed to do? Also, so what you're better off doing is, please stay here. Do you see how much easier that is to understand? Because you've not told them what not to, but you haven't told them what to do. But it's real clear and short. So if you ask things are yes, no, remember the dolls. Do you want to take a bath? No. Because you're going to get, why would I want you to ask me that? You're going to get my personal space, right? Do you want to make your lunch? No, I'd rather sit and watch the TV, right? Do you want to go see George at the Memory Cafe? What's wrong with that? too long, but do you think they know what a memory cafe is?
No.
So if you don't know what something is, you really are content with what you're doing, you don't want it, your answers are going to be what? The default is always no. So if you don't want the no's, you give them choices. Would you like to make your lunch now or later? Would you want me to help you make lunch, or do you want to do it by yourself? Do you know what I mean? That you give them choices. The choice is not to do it, but how they want to do it. How are we doing on time?
1:26.
Okay, so come back, back off and come back later. This is a strategy that is so effective that if you have someone getting worked up, they're not wanting to do it, don't get in the argument. My little Archie dude should have just done this, right? And we learned this very well when I worked at a day center in Milwaukee County. So it was a large center. We had like older adults, 55 and up, and a lot of them were in wheelchairs, but they are, had all different kind of conditions going on. So once a month we had an evacuation, like a fire drill. We had to get all of them out. Now we had 8 staff. How are we gonna get 55 people out? So they had all these other folks in the building, like accounting, HR, come down and help us, right? And we knew, and we were told, that if we had a client decline to leave during a fire drill, that they would be put on a behavioral program, and if we could not successfully get them to leave the building during the fire, that we were compromising their safety and they would not be able to return. Yes, because they weren't willing to leave when they were supposed to, and their safety, we didn't want them to burn up. And so the staff became very passionate about getting folks who did not want to leave and go out in the cold to leave. How do we do that? Well, as a team, and we had all these HR, all these other people that want to touch, folks that are older, come down. Well, one of the strategies we learned to do this, the staff kind of knew who our tough ones were, right? And so when that drill went off and we started having people down, we each kind of watched who was doing what. And if I would go up to Irma and say, hey Irma, we got to go outside. If Irma said, no, I'm not going, I would move on. I wouldn't sit and argue with her because we had 55 people to get out, right? But another staff person would see that happen, would go over and say, hey Irma, you always like being the leader, you're gonna be the last one. Do you want to be the last one? No, well let's go. And she would get them out. So we took turns that if I was ineffective, someone else tried. And if they weren't someone else would come. But we would start getting everybody out. We didn't sit and argue with that person. Another person would kind of take another choice. Now there was an aide, her name was Tony. She could get probably anybody to do anything. So if anybody was last, Tony was the one to get them out. But it really is about, don't fight with them. Back off, come back, they'll forget. Remember that doll's gone, they'll forget that interface and they'll go out. But that's again knowing something about the person, and Tony was very good. She knew that Irma wanted to be the leader, so Irma would go out if she was being told she wasn't the leader, then she'd do it. Knowing something about them is really important.
I'm glad you said that because we have practiced fire drills with our group, and some of them get traumatized for 2 hours afterwards because they don't understand what's going on, and we have to move them, and they're like, what's going on? So maybe I'm going to go back to them and say we need to come up with a better plan to maybe lessen this anxiety for these people.
We were never successful in getting them out, and then I started incorporating a staff. We decided how to do that, and we came up with a very creative plan, but it was how we used other people. We did training with our HR and our payroll people.
You have to do that.
We had to do a whole lot. You can touch them. We showed them how we practice how to use the wheelchairs. And we had someone in command giving direction and redirecting people, and they didn't want to go in the bathroom because someone's privacy. I mean, we had to do a lot of training to get this to happen. But we did it. We were successful in getting them out. Now, I did scold the administration when they decided to do it right before lunch, and we're setting up for lunch because most of my people would not leave. I said, this is a drill.
Right.
You should not be doing it in lunch and traumatizing them. The other thing is they have to pay attention with a lot of our older adults. They had vascular, they had cardiac issues. When that loud sound went off, we paid attention to those people because they were anxious. They had no idea. Many of our people knew it was a fire drill, but some of it was a new thing each time. And so we had to pay attention to make sure, because I said, you're going to give someone a cardiac arrest doing this.
And they did it during the Packer game, so you're right. That was another bad time. People were watching the
Shame on you.
Yeah, it was like, you didn't really think this through. Yeah.
They didn't argue with Jody too much more after. Once we had success, we had a little more pull. Change the topic. So tell me, What do I mean by this?
Mindset.
So I would go visit a lot of people that were in like a CBRF and stuff, and they said, I want to go home. What would I say to them? Oh, tell me about your home. Oh, did you have flowers? What kind of flowers did you plant? I personally love irises. Do you ever have irises? Pretty soon we're talking about something else, but it's something they have interest in. They start telling me about it. What should Archie have done with this? This was my trick to getting Archie to do his thing. What should Archie do?
He could have said, like, what were their favorite meals they like to make? What did your mom like to cook? Or, try to bring up memories that she might still have.
That would be one strategy. He said to her, what do you think Mom likes? Oh, I think your dad likes roast beef. Roast beef's on sale tomorrow at the store. So we should have roast beef tomorrow, but I'm in the mood for chicken. What do you think about chicken? That he should have an idea ahead of time and then change the topic. I also start telling him, don't ask her what she wants for dinner. You're starting off every time. Why do you do that? But changing the topic became his best ally and getting rid of that. This is like one of the easiest ones, let me tell you. So we've had a number of folks in my family, in my extended, my in-law family that have lived with Alzheimer's disease. As I mentioned, my mother-in-law and my grandfather is where I first connected with the Alzheimer's Association. But my husband's aunt, Harriet, also lived with Alzheimer's disease. And I was tasked, she lived in a subsidized housing. She never worked outside the home. Her IQ was a little bit lower. She was probably borderline. She never had a bank account. She always had a check that she got that she would go cash at the local grocery store or liquor store, and then she would use cash for all of her transactions. Well, when she started living with the disease, she no longer could do that. And so we had to set up a bank account. My sister-in-law, who was her POA, her finance, lived in Kansas, so I was tasked to go take her to the bank, which was down the street from her apartment. So I go to pick her up, and she was a very conservative individual, and so I said, oh, Harriet, we're gonna go to the bank. What do you mean we're going to the bank? Oh, Marie, my sister-in-law, who she loves and felt like Marie couldn't tell her to do anything, Marie wants us to go set up a bank account. It's gonna be really cool. I have one and Chris has one. Why don't we go do that? Chris is my husband. Oh, okay. So she gets her code, and I said, do you have your check? And she goes, yeah. So we get out the door, and I key, oh yeah. So we go down the hallway, we get to the hallway, we push the button, and she goes, oh, where are we going? So we're gonna go to the bank. Marie thought we should go to the bank. Oh, okay. Get on the elevator, push the door, we start going down the, visuals are helpful, right? Get going down the thing, elevators come down, open the door, what do you think she says?
Where are we going?
I said, oh, we're going to go to the bank. Marie thought we should go to the bank. Each time I say this, I keep my voice in check. Oh, we're going to the bank. Like this is the first time I'm saying, oh, I'm doing such a good job here, right? Yeah, we're going to the bank. Trying to pull my hair out, but yeah, we're going to the bank. Marie thinks we should go to the bank. I have a bank account. This is going to be really fun. So we start walking down the street. I got 2 blocks with her. How many more times do you think she asked me this, right? The repetitive is just a part of it. Remember, those outer dolls are gone?
Mm-hmm.
So what should I do? I mean, I wasn't smart enough at the time to think about this, but what would I have been done that wouldn't have caused me so much frustration and have to keep in check my voice, my body language and everything, and, oh, we're going to the bank, each time saying it over the same way. What should I have done?
Can you think of different answers each time? Like, I mean, I have a dementia person I work with, and every time I try to think of a different answer, like, you know.
Can. I always, people call it therapeutic fibbing. I've never been a proponent of that. There are a lot of people that are, so I'm not going to knock it. Because I've had that bite me, that someone did recall some of it, especially if it involves food or something happy, they remember that part.
Yeah.
I have found that as long as you're not telling them not
Well, that's what I
to
mean,
do
not fibbing. Like she would say, I'm not going to see you tomorrow, am I? You know? And I'd say, well, let's enjoy today. We're together.
Exactly. So that's kind of a distraction.
Yeah. And then she'd say it again, and then I think of something else. Like, oh, the sun's out. You know, maybe we can go outside. You know? I mean, I'm trying to always think of something different, so it wouldn't get on my nerves.
So for me, I should have done, because what we were doing is getting some cash so that she could go buy a sweater. So I should have started off saying, oh yeah, we're going to the bank because you need cash to get a sweater. Oh, so what kind of a sweater do you think you want? Do you like long sleeves? Do you like short sleeves?
Right.
What's your favorite color? You know, and I'd start saying, oh, sweater reminds me of the fall leaves. I should have started a conversation with her that could continue so that we didn't have this time that she's like, oh, where are we going? Where she had been totally distracted the entire walk. We'd have had a lovely conversation. She would have been engaged. She'd been practicing her word skills. It's like, shame on you, Jody. But, you know, back then I didn't know. But you know now, right? Some of the other things is I talked about the medical part that does impact a person's ability, especially with dementia. I've seen people that have been living with Alzheimer's disease and they get a urinary tract infection. All of a sudden they're falling, they're more confused. Medical conditions does impact the brain's abilities, especially when we have a dementia condition. Try to keep consistent providers. Really focus on healthy stuff. That's what we're finding in terms of prevention and stuff. Living a healthy life. What your mom told you to do is really what you should be doing, right? Everything in moderation. Maintain records. I include even like videotape. Use a notebook, a calendar. Family would forget when things happen. Just take a calendar, write a word on it on that date, and then you just have this calendar with simple words that it's easier to retrieve. Just, you know what I'm saying? It makes so much more sense. Not a long, big journal, just a calendar, just a few notes. It will help you kind of ground that information. The other thing is when you go to the doctors, I'm sorry, they're set up as a business. You got a 20-minute appointment. If you're going in and expecting to spend an hour, you're going to be totally frustrated. Because the person, you might be the person sitting there waiting, they're set up. You have to begin to figure out how you can work with a practitioner that meets everybody's needs. I didn't say enough about that, and I know you're going to probably be unhappy, but at some point I'll explain that more if you want afterwards. So, dear past, oh, I just love this. I think that's kind of fun. Most of us can appreciate that picture.
Doris Day?
Yeah.
Thank you for the lessons of the past, but my question is, are you ready for the future? Do they have the advanced directives? Many of them are doing supportive decision making now. Those things are in place. Advanced decisions, do you have the next steps set up? You really should. We stop planning. I don't know why it is just general population. You should not just think about what we're doing today, but what the future is going to bring. But don't get overwhelmed with it, because one of the things I learned most with working with families that are supporting someone living with a dementia condition is that they are so caught about what the future is going to bring and the losses that are coming that they forget to appreciate what today has for them and the skills that are going on. So you really need to appreciate and embrace what you have today, because we know tomorrow's not going to be maybe the same. So let's enjoy today and stop and smell the roses, because I guess is my message on this one. Because if you're caught up about the future, you don't necessarily pay attention to what's going on. These are some really good resources. I do have this. I didn't want to hand this out because I didn't want you to be distracted while we're doing this. It's on the back of the handout. There's just some communication strategies that are that were in the PowerPoint for you. And then here's the NIH has a wonderful website. You can get free stuff there. Here's their pamphlet on Down syndrome and dementia, which I thought was very good. We do have our annual conference coming up in 2 weeks from today. If anybody's interested, I do have flyers here.
I'll take one.
I will.
Are you a speaker there?
No.
No, darn.
I think that was a compliment. I'll take it. And then if you have, my job is to go out and try to improve the IQ of healthcare providers. So I do go out and present on topics like this other. So if you have interest, I'll pass this around too. And then I do have one additional set of the NGT if anybody wants it. Might wrestle her in the hallway. It's on the resourcing. Other questions, comments? You guys put this all? Yes.
I just appreciate, Jody, that you mentioned with the evaluation to actually look at doing it younger. Because
Yes.
the majority of the individuals that I worked with Down syndrome and Alzheimer's were in their 30s.
Oh, wow.
So they would have never been tested.
They
if
would
they
have,
go by-
yes,
yeah.
they would never have had the baseline kind of set with them. You're right.
Yeah, so I'm a strong advocate too that needs to be earlier than what they
Do it and then
recommend.
just put it on the side. There's no
Yeah.
harm to it, right?
Right.
And if you're in the school setting, you have like the OT or the people, the professionals working them actually do it. So you have it and you get additional records to support it.
Well, there's one agents at workshop that I was doing some training for, and when we talked about the participants there, and it was talking about changes that they were noticing, that, you know, a lot of their individuals had to sign at the workshop, so they were noticing changes in their signature.
Yep.
And then those that had hobbies that were in residential facilities, like one lady who would crochet granny squares, it's almost like a visual of what was happening to her brain. Her granny squares went from 4-sided to 5-sided to 6-sided to basically like a web.
Yeah, and those are excellent examples of what to come and look for. Other things, so much, Bonnie, for sharing that. But that's an example of, those are really good examples. Other questions or comments? Thank you so much. Oh, yes.
I just wanted to comment, I had a lady that was 101 that I took care of.
Wow.
And I put up a Christmas tree from years ago, and she hadn't had a Christmas tree, and she kept forgetting. So she would say, "You have such a beautiful Christmas tree. Who did it?" And I said, "I did." Well, she kept asking and asking, but I said, she never enjoyed a Christmas more than that year, and I never enjoyed putting up a Christmas tree with all the thank yous.
Oh, good for you. Good for you. Thank you for sharing that. Again, look at the person. This is not a disease. This is a person that you were interfacing with. Come to the table and make it a good one. Well, thank you. Yes.